And the final throne, no, not the final throne of glass, the final Tower of Dawn video. A lot of important stuff happens at the end of Tower of Dawn, both emotionally for our characters, but also just information we receive. It gets like pretty crazy. It changes what we think we know about the whole world up to this point. It's very exciting. I'm excited to walk through it with you. So let's jump in. Okay, first let's give like a little recap of where we left off. So we actually left off with Chaol and Yrene. It was Irene's birthday. They were at this desert oasis owned by the royal family for Irene's birthday. Hasar was throwing her a little birthday party. Hasar is evil. I do not like her. We are not friends. But that's not important. Yrene and Chaol finally hooked up. They are deeply, madly, profoundly in love now. And we love it for them. Honestly, I wept. I wept and wept and wept at the end of last video, if you were not here for that. They also learned some stuff about how the Fae people that lived in this area were connected to the healers somehow, and how that somehow connected to the valg. Great, we love that for them. We will explore that more later. We were with Nesryn and Sartaq, and they were doing some exploring in the Karankui region of the southern continent, and they got in a trap. Kadara, Sartaq's rook, got trapped in a spiderweb. She fell to the ground. She was able to get away, but now Nesryn and Sartaq are trying to hike out. They have Falcon, the shapeshifter, with them, but like, it's not looking great for them. And that's actually where we will pick up. Nesryn and Sartaq are hiking through this mountain pass, trying to get to an area where Kadara could pick them up, because Kadara obviously could just like fly away with them, but they're in these like rocks that are like very tightly packed together, and Kadara like can't fly. You know, can't get her full wingspan out to get them. So they're trying to hike out to a spot where Kadara can grab them and they can leave. Sartaq is like pretty badly injured. When he fell, he didn't break any bones, but he did get like fairly scraped up, and the hiking isn't very fun for him at this point because he is like fairly badly injured. Falcon has stayed in his mouse form where he was for transportation because they want to use the element of surprise. If they do get into an encounter with the spiders, they want to be able to like whip Falcon out and have him turn into something cool, but they don't want the spiders to know that they have that. Falcon is not hiking. He's just riding around in Nesryn's pocket. He really has gotten the best of this situation. Nesryn is pretty sure that they are in a trap because the spiders know exactly where they were. Like, know exactly where they entered this mountain pass. They also obviously know the mountains better than Sartaq and Nesryn do. So she's sure that they know where they're going. She's like, we're going into a trap. Like, this is like, there's only one way to walk through this. And we're walking through it. So, like, the spiders are probably going to be all waiting for them on the other side. And Nesryn's kind of braced for that. She's also starting to get concerned because it's starting to get dark out. It's starting to get cold. Sartaq clearly needs someone to, like, tend to his wounds. Like, he's not, like, mortally injured, but, like, he needs some medical attention. Things could get bad pretty quickly. They get to a particularly narrow spot in this mountain pass, and Nesryn is able to kind of like wiggle herself through the rocks without much trouble, but Sartaq, who is obviously like a little bit bigger than Nesryn, immediately gets stuck, and Nesryn is trying to get him to go either way. She's like pulling on him, she's like shoving him, trying to like shove him back through, but then she hears the sound of the spiders like skittering on the stones behind him. They obviously knew that this was a narrow part of the passage and have been waiting to see if they will get stuck here, and he is. And she's like pulling on Sartaq, trying to get him through. And she can hear the spiders talking on the other side of these rocks past Sartaq. And one of the spiders says, "What a fine morsel," our guest hissed a soft female voice, "so large he cannot even fit through the passage. How we shall feast." And Sartaq turns to Nesryn and is like, "You run, like go, like you need to get out of here. Like don't wait around to get eaten by the spiders. Like bye." And then she hears the spiders talking again. "A pretty pair," the female spider continued. "How her hair shines like a moonless night. We shall take you both back to our home, our honored guests." Also, Taylor Swift is going to announce Reputation like any minute, so I do have to occasionally check my phone and see if Taylor Nation is going live on Instagram. Because can't miss that. Can't miss the announcement of an album we do already have. And then this is what happened. His dark eyes met hers. There was no fear in them. Sartaq said to her, clear and steady, "I heard the spies' stories of you. The fearless Balharuni woman in Ardelayne's empire, Neith's arrow, and I knew." Nesryn sobbed, tugging and tugging. Sartaq smiled at her, gently, sweetly, in a way she had not yet seen. "I loved you before I had set eyes on you," he said. "Please," Nesryn wept. Sartaq's hands tightened on hers. "I wish we had time." Sergio Best loves this line, like a variation of this line of like, "I wish we had more time." She uses a similar line with Aelin and Rowan in Empire of Storms. She uses this line with other couples in other books, and it will get me every time. "I wish we'd had time." Variations on this, chef's kiss, it's perfection. And then he vanishes. He's pulled between the rocks and he's just gone. And Nesryn's like, okay, I have to keep going. Like, the only choice I have is to keep going at this point. Like, it would be foolish for me to, like, try to chase after him. Like, the spiders obviously can just, like, climb up the rocks. And there's a bunch of them in one of me. I need to get help. Like, my best bet is to get out of here and to get help if I have any chance of saving Sartaq. And she can hear the spiders, like, skittering behind her. Like, they're following her down this mountain passage now. But she has some hope because she knows that the spiders were taking him back to their home, their spider home, their spider web, alive, because, like, they're gonna be guests. And they mentioned as they were, like, rambling that they were going to keep them alive as, like, guests for a while, as spiders do. You know, they wrap you up in a little cocoon, but they keep you alive in their little spider web. And so she's like, okay, we've got some time. Like, they're not going to kill him immediately. And then she comes up with a plan. And remember, Falcon, little mouse Falcon, is with her. And so she whispers the plan to a little mouse Falcon. And she's like, okay, I know what we're gonna do. Next thing we know, we see Nesryn covered in blood. It looks like she has slipped and fallen from some of the rocks, scraped herself up pretty badly. The spiders scramble over to her. They can smell how bloody she is, and they pick her up, they wrap her up in her spider silk, and they take her back to their nest. Nesryn passes out, and the next thing she feels is something biting her. It's just Falcon, the little mouse shapeshifter, is nibbling on the spider silks, trying to gnaw through them. And he just, like, accidentally nipped her ear. No big deal. But now she's awake and she's looking around, and she is in a different part of this, like, mountain pass. It is not like a cave, but the spider webs are so, like, dense above them that there's very little light getting down to where they are, like, on the mountain floor. And it's also getting dark out. So they're in this just, like, spider webby area. Spooky, creepy, ooky. She also spots Sartaq. Sartaq is wrapped up in spider silk, and he is just below her on one of these webs. And she's like, hey, Sartaq. She's trying to, like, whisper to see if she can get his attention without drawing the attention of the spiders and letting them know that she is wide awake. But he doesn't wake up. He doesn't stir at all. He's just passed out down there. Then she hears a spider coming, and Falcon scurries away to hide. Again, they don't want to reveal that they have this, like, shapeshifter with them. So Nesryn has some sort of plan, and Falcon is obviously involved in it. And the spider is, like, now talking to Nesryn, knows that she's awake. And he's like, why were you guys here sneaking around? Like, what were you looking for? What were you up to? What were you doing? And Nesryn is like, we were here because a merchant traded with your northern sisters. And the spider's like, ew, they are so annoying, our northern sisters. They are, like, trading things when we were born to devour. Nesryn's like, oh my gosh, so you guys don't do the whole spider silk for dreams sort of situation? And the spider's like, no, but we, like, would for sure, like, eat your dreams and, like, years off of your life before we, like, eat you up. So we will eat those, but you will not get anything in exchange. We do not make spider silk. Like, that's not what we're doing. And Nesryn is like, okay, so what do you guys do? Are you doing anything to support your local economy? So it seems like maybe you were just leeching off of everyone else. Spider says, the Karnkui says to her, we wait. And Nesryn says, okay, cool. For what? And the spider, like, gestures at this drawing that's behind him of a gate, of, like, a mysterious word gate with a hooded figure inside of it. And Nesryn is like, okay, who then? Who are you waiting for? And the spider's like, our queen. And Nesryn's like, not Erewhon. And the spider's like, ewa! Literally never Erewhon. Disgusting that you would even suggest that. We wait for the queen of the valg. You might know her as Queen Maeve. This moment, I was on the floor. Couldn't even handle it. The fact that Queen Maeve is a valg. Crazy. And then, like, I guess we've known she's been, like, evil. Like, low-key evil up until this point. But, like, the fact that she's valg. Nesryn obviously is also confused and, like, a little, like, gagged at this realization, and she says, she's Queen of the Fae, actually. I think you might be mistaken. I know her, like, she's Queen of the Fae. And the spider's like, that's what you think. And Nesryn is internally like, oh my god, what the hell is happening? But externally, she's keeping it cool, calm, collected, and she says, oh my gosh, that's so cool that she's both. That she's Queen of the Valg and Queen of the Fae. Will you tell me the story? Like, tell me the story of how she came to be Queen of the Fae. And the spider is like, we are going to kill you regardless, just so you know. And Nesryn is like, oh my gosh, for sure. Like, no question about that. I know that you're going to kill me, but I love a story. Love a tale. My mom used to tell me stories all the time. It was so fun, so cute, so cool. I would just love a little story before you know, eat me up as, like, a little snack. And the spider's like, fine, since you dared ask, you're bold enough to ask for a story, I am obviously going to be bold enough to give you one in return. And we're about to launch into a story that is very important. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm talking to you who are watching this video. Make sure we have our listening ears on. Okay, do we have our listening ears on? We ready? We see that? Okay, let's proceed. The spider begins long ago. In another world, another lifetime, there existed a land of dark and cold and wind, ruled by 3 kings, masters of shadow and pain, brothers. The world had not always been this way, had not been born that way, but they waged a mighty war. A war to end all wars, and those 3 kings conquered it, turned it into a wasteland, a paradise for those who dwelled in darkness. For 1,000 years they ruled, until a queen showed up. Queen Maeve, as we know her. She was super cool and super powerful, and all of the brothers wanted to marry her. All the brothers wanted to get with her because she was a super cool, powerful lady. And so she selected the strongest. And Nesryn is like, Erwan. And the spider's like, ew, no, could you please stop interrupting? You're wrong every single time. Orcus, the eldest of the 3 brothers. And they wed, but Maeve immediately is not having a good time. She's not enjoying this marriage. He is boring. And she is bored in this wasteland because the boys took over and they just made everything boring. And she's like, I want to go somewhere where I can have a girly pop time. And so she starts to learn how to peek into other realms and travel to other worlds. And she is like, wow, most of these other places are way cooler because the boys aren't the only ones in charge and they didn't turn these places into wastelands. And there's more for me to do. Okay? Like, it is boring here. So one day, when Orcus wasn't paying attention, Orcus was gone doing something dumb and boring, Maeve sneakily her way through this gate that she was able to make. She ripped a hole in the fabric between the realms and she just slipped on through it, came on through, brought her spiders with her, and she arrived right here, like right where they're standing in the southern continent. This is where Maeve, the Valg queen, first arrived. And she brought her spiders as her guards in case someone came for her because she did not want to go back. She said, this world is way cooler. There's way more stuff here. And I'm sick of the boys who are boring and mean. She was also mean, but not boring. And I think that's true. I think you can say a lot of things about Maeve, but boring isn't one of them. Like, Maeve does know how to have a fun time. Is that fun time by torturing people? So, yeah, often. But, like, Orcus obviously didn't love this, and he started looking for his wife. And so him and his 3 brothers got these 3 keys, and these 3 keys allowed them to travel through doors, through word gates. They were able to open these gates between worlds and travel, but they didn't know where Maeve was. So they started going from world to world, just like creating destruction, leaving destruction in their wake, just like a hot mess, a row behind them. But finally he arrived here looking for his wife. And Nesryn is like, and they found her. And he's like, no. Obviously they didn't find her because she knew they were going to come for her. And so she had already left this continent. She said, bye, I'm going to go and start my own thing and be a sneaky, sneaky lady so you won't know where to find me. She went up to Doranel, the Feylands that she currently occupies, and there were already 2 sisters ruling over that land, Mab and Mora. And she said, actually, I am your 3rd sister. I've always been here. And she planted the idea in their minds and everyone else's minds. She said, don't you guys remember me? I'm your older sister. And they were like, oh yeah, of course, obviously. The Valg kings, when they did arrive, didn't know who they were facing. They didn't recognize Maeve to be the Valg queen. They were like, oh yeah, these are 3 sisters. Our wife, well, Orcus's wife, is clearly not one of them because, like, these 3 sisters have been here since before she left. And Maeve was like, for sure. But she knew who she was fighting. She had an advantage because she knew what the Valg's weaknesses were because she is a Valg. And so she was able to send 2 of the brothers back, but before she could send the 3rd back, Brandon stole the keys. And she wanted to keep the keys for herself. So she was keeping the keys for herself because she didn't want to open the gates. Also, she wanted the power that comes with the keys. The keys have a lot of power. She wanted it. Erwan was just like put to rest. As we know from the story, Erwan was like entombed, but she knew he was going to come back eventually. And so since that day, Maeve has been building up her armies, waiting for the day that Erwan will rise again, in case this time he recognizes her. And we, the Karankui, are just waiting in the southern continent for her to call on us. And Nesryn's like, oh, that's nice. But before, too much chit-chatting can happen, story is complete, another spider scurries on over and is like, hey, girly, there are 20 rooks on the northern edge of our border, like coming here. So if you could like check on that. I don't know what our plan is. What are we going to do? And the spider's like, ugh, I will go deal with it. So white outline spider, all the spiders look the same. So we did have to differentiate. So white outline spider scurries away. Blue outline spider is Falcon. He's actually Falcon. That was Nesryn's sneaky little plan. She was going to have Falcon shapeshift into a spider, and here he is. And so he's able to use his little mandibles. I don't know, I just made that up. His little spider mouth to rip open their spider silks. He does cut them a little bit because he's so like sharp and pointy, but he gets them out of their silks and they start running. Sartaq is awake now. They've got to go quickly. Nesryn has got an idea. She's like shooting flaming arrows back behind them. Like ripped off a strip of her shirt, wrapped it around an arrow, and is like pew, 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 shooting the spiders with flaming arrows. But like the spiders are coming for them very quickly, and Nesryn doesn't have unlimited arrows, obviously. So she's starting to freak out, and then Falcon says, I'm going to hold the spiders off for you. You guys run, and I will hold the spiders off. That's like your best chance. And he says, but can I ask you a favor before I like die? I'm literally about to sacrifice myself to save you guys. So can I ask you a quick favor before I go? And he says to her, a favor, Captain. The shifter said to her, time. They did not have time. When I was 7, my older brother sired a bastard daughter off of a poor woman in Rifthold, abandoned them both. It has been 20 years since then, and from when I was old enough to go to the city to begin my trade, I looked for her, found the mother after some years, on her deathbed. She could barely talk long enough to say she'd kicked the girl out. She did not know where my niece was, didn't care. She died before she could give me a name. If she survived, she's grown. She might have the shifter gift too, but it doesn't matter if she does or does not. What matters, she's my family, all I have left, and I have looked for her for a very long time. Find her, Falcon said. My fortune, all of it is for her, and I may have failed her in this life, but not in my death. So he's like, okay, girlies, you have to find my niece, who's also a shifter, who's the exact same age as Lysandra. And then Falcon jumps down into the crowd of spiders, and Nesryn and Sartaq are like turning to run away, but then spiders come from the other direction. They are like trapped between these two large groups of spiders. There is no way to get out. Nesryn is trying to hold them off with arrows, but like it is not looking good. And when all of a sudden Port arrives, she arrives on her rook and she takes out the spiders, and she is not alone. She has 2 other rook riders with her and Kadara, so her betrothed Yrene, along with Arando and Kadara are all there, and Kadara is able to fly down. They're in a wider area. Kadara is able to fly down and scoop up Nesryn and Sartaq, and they're able to grab Falcon as well, and they fly away, shooting burning arrows behind them as like the mountain pass burns, and they probably killed a bunch of spiders. Meanwhile, let's check back in on our little lovers, Chaol and Yrene. They are headed back to Antica. It is dawn on the mountains. As soon as the sun started to peek over the horizon, they left, leaving a note for Hasar saying that they had been called back for an emergency with a patient that needed their help urgently. They arrive back to the palace. Chaol is limping and sore, but like the vibes are like so intensely flirty. Like the flirtiest flirt vibes. Like they're just having the best time. Flirty McFlirterson. But the flirt vibes are short-lived because they get back to Chaol's bedroom and it has been ransacked. Like everything has been turned out. The couch cushions are like ripped open. Drawers are like flung out of their containers. His suitcase, does he have a suitcase? I don't know. I made that up. I don't know. It's a mess in there, okay? That's all we know. And very quickly, we realize that someone, probably a valg guy, came in, looked through all their things, and took every single book and scroll they'd hidden around their room. And this is when I have to go, okay, when we hit those scrolls and books, that was approximately at least 3 weeks ago, I think. I think pretty easily we can say that was definitely a few weeks ago. And why did we leave them all in Chaol's room, hidden in his stuff? Like, we knew that there's been a valg guy in the palace. Like, he was in your bedroom. Why didn't we take, maybe not all of them, maybe we leave some of them hidden in Chaol's room. Why didn't we take any of them to the tour? Why didn't we hide any of them in the tour? I know the valg has also gotten in the tour, but it seems like we could have hidden some in Irene's room where there has been no valg, or in Hafiza's office where, again, there has been no valg. But no, we left them in his, like, under his socks. I just feel like there could have been better options here, guys. I feel like we could have made some different choices, but they didn't, and here we are. But there's one scroll remaining. There was a scroll that they had tucked into one of Chaol's boots. And Yrene is like, we need to go to the tour ASAP and show Hafiza this scroll. This is like all we have to show her, but like, we gotta do this quick. And Chaol suddenly looks over and sees Nesryn's room, and he remembers that Nesryn exists. He like had forgotten about her for a second there, and then he realizes that Nesryn exists, and they've like not like officially broken up, although I truly believe in my heart of hearts Nesryn did break up with him over a note. Okay, like, I think that note was a breakup from Nesryn's perspective, but Chaol doesn't feel like he has closure on that relationship. He is like, you know, Yrene, maybe you should, like, go to the tour by yourself and, like, sleep there tonight. I can't appear to be running away, especially with the royals now starting to think might be someone of interest. That Aelin continues to be such a source of worry and intrigue. Perhaps I should use that to my advantage, but I should stay here, and Yrene, you should go. And Yrene is like, okay, whatever. Like, she is so sick of this man's weirdness. She knows he's acting weird. She can, like, pick it up because she's not stupid. But she, like, doesn't have time to deal with him being a weirdo. She doesn't. We have bigger fish to fry right now, Chaol. And if you want to be weird, I guess that's your business, you know? Sometimes you have to do that with Chaol. And she says, okay, I'm going to take that scroll to Hafiza myself. You do whatever you need to do, you weirdo. Chaol thinks to himself. He hated the edge to her voice as he nodded, the dimming of those eyes. He'd done wrong by her, too. And not for standing at things with Nesryn. To make it clear, he'd made a mess of it, a fool. He'd been a fool to think he could rise above this, move beyond the person he'd become, the mistakes he made, a fool. Yrene gets back to the tour and is like, the whole time she's kind of like thinking about like Chaol and trying to like decode why he might be such a weirdo. Don't even worry about it. Chaol is just a weirdo. That's just like how he acts. And Hafiza's like, welcome back. Happy birthday. How was your party? I assume the young lord has finally given his heart to you. And Yrene is like, it's not like that. And Hafiza's like, I can see the locket you are currently sporting that I assume is a gift from him. So I do indeed think it is like that. And she's like, well, we're not like official. He's a lord of Ardelayne. And Hafiza's like, I literally thought we were over that. Like, you have been working with this boy. He is like your bestie. You guys are like attached at the hip. I thought you had gotten over the fact that he was from Ardelayne. Regardless, that's not what we're here to talk about. I know, like, we could spend all day chit-chatting about your crush on this boy. But, like, why did you come? Because clearly you came here seeking something urgently. And Yrene closes all the doors and windows in Hafiza's office and explains what happened with Chaol's room and how his room was completely sacked, and explains what they think is happening with the valg and kind of like the Fae healers and what they found at the Oasis. And Hafiza is like, are you sure? And Yrene is like, yes, Chaol is pretty sure. He fought the valg back on the northern continent. This is like, he knows that those are valg, and like from what we've seen, like, yes, we are sure. And Hafiza's like, and you think the healers might be involved? And Yrene shows her the scroll, and Hafiza's like, okay, well, I can't read that language. That is clearly in word marks, we know. And she can't read word marks, but she says, that does remind me of the books in my super secret cabinet. I have a super secret cabinet as a healer on high. Here's the super secret key to the super secret cabinet, and I was told that the books inside are not meant for human eyes. Yrene is like, okay, cool. We're going to need those books anyway. I'm going to need you to give me those books anyway. Maybe someone in Aelin's crew. She has like a pretty diverse little group. Maybe someone there can read these books, because if you can't read them, it seems silly to keep them here. And Hafiza's like, I'm going to have to think on it. There are some like real risks to me taking them out of the super secret cabinet and sending them with you, especially since you just lost all those books. Honestly, don't know if we can trust you with super secret books. And Irene's like, okay, whatever. And Hafiza's like, okay, but in the meantime, I will tell you everything I know, which is not a lot, but this is what I know. 1, the Fae were here first. Like, this land was originally inhabited by the Fae. And one of the main things we know about them, one of the kind of the interesting things about them, is that they were buried in these sarcophagus. They were not buried in the ground. They were buried above ground, and they were put in these sarcophagus that were like locked with these special spells and things. So they could not be opened because they were worried about something coming in and using their bodies once they were dead. Obviously the valg possession. 2, the Fae left their healing knowledge for us. They had stolen it from elsewhere, and their teachings formed the basis of everything we do here in the tour. Kamala herself had been trained in their arts, their records discovered in tombs and catacombs long since lost to us. She founded the tour based off of what she learned, what she and her small order learned. Worshipped Silba because she was their healing god too. So like, yes, we are deeply connected to the Fae, the healers' traditions, like all of their kind of like spiritual traditions and connections are connected back to Fae origins. And Yrene is like, cool, thank you for that. I have to go tell Nusha that all of her books are gone. She's gonna be so mad. And Hafiza's like, yeah, probably, but like, she probably is gonna go after the person who stole them from you. Like, she's not gonna be super mad at you, you know? And Irene's like, I just don't know why they would go to so much trouble to steal, like, books. Like, that just doesn't seem like, you know, where I would focus my energy if I was an evil valg person. And Hafiza's like, you gotta figure out why. Like, why are they so interested in these books? This is crucial information. And so Yrene has had like kind of a crazy day, and so she takes herself down to the wombs, those baths that are beneath the tour, to clear her head. And she's like soaking in the pools, and then she goes to find her bell. So the tradition at the tour is that every healer, when they enter the tour, hangs their bell in the wombs downstairs. And so Yrene goes to find her bell, and she goes down there and she rings it, and the sound doesn't sound normal. Like, it travels like it's trying to lead her somewhere. And so she rings it again, and this time she follows the sounds. Past the bells of generations of healers, all singing in its wake, Yrene streamed her fingers along them too. A wave of sound answered, "You must enter where you fear to tread." And she follows it over to this corner where the bells are much older, and she, like, hundreds of years old, and she's looking at through all these bells, and she sees a bell that looks at a date that is over 200 years old with the name Yafa Towers engraved on it. A Towers woman, a Towers healer here with her. A Towers woman had been singing in this room during the years Yrene had dwelt here. Even now, even so far from home, she had never once been alone. Yafa. Yrene mouthed the name, a hand on her heart. Enter where you fear to tread. Yrene peered up into the darkness of the womb overhead. She had never once been alone. And then I cried a little bit, obviously, because this is so sweet. I feel like Tower of Dawn in a lot of ways is like the thesis statement to the Throne of Glass series. And one of the things that I think is so beautifully explored here is the way community works, the way community spreads both forwards and backwards. And like we have this like very present community that Yrene is participating in with the tour, but also there's this sense of connection to like the past and the people that have come before you and the ways in which they hold you. And I just love we see this in a very tangible way later in, but I just like love this like connection to know she was never alone here. Like even when she thought she was alone, she was like surrounded by the history of her people, of her great-grandmother, her great-great-grandmother who was here before her. And that is enough of a realization for Yrene to kind of put the last pieces together and figure out what she needs to do to heal Chaol. She realizes that the valg is feeding off of that dark place inside of him. Like it is like a parasite. It is not like something that she can get rid of like an infection, but more something like a parasite where the more darkness Chaol has within him, the bigger and stronger it's going to get. And the room seems to answer yes, like seems to like hear what she is thinking and be like, you are right, you got it, we've been rooting for you. And Yrene realizes what she needs to do. Not the void lurking within him, but the void within herself. The one that had started those days the soldiers had gathered around her cottage, had hauled her out by her hair into the bright grasses. Had Yafa known, here in this chamber so far beneath the earth, what had happened that day across the sea? As she watched the past 2 months and sent up her ancient, rusted song in silent urging? No, they weren't bad men, Yrene. No, they were not. The men he had commanded, trained with, who had worn the same uniform, bowed to the same king as the soldiers who had come that day. They were not bad men. People existed in Ardelayne worth saving, worth fighting for. They were not her enemy, had never been. Perhaps she had known that all along, before he had revealed it at the oasis yesterday. Perhaps she had not wanted to. But the thing that remained inside him, that shred of the demon who had ordered it all, I know what you are, Yrene said silently. For it was the same thing that had dwelled inside her all these years, taking from her even as it sustained her. A different creature, but still one and the same. Yrene spooled her magic back inside herself, the glow fading as she smiled up at the sweet darkness above. I understand now. Another drop of water kissed her brow in answer. Smiling, Yrene reached out a hand to her ancestor's bell and rang it. Meanwhile, back at the palace, Chaol is not doing super well. He wakes up the next day after he sent Yrene away, and he is so sore. Like, he really overexerted himself with all the horseback riding and also other activities that him and Yrene got up to. And now he's a little bit sore. He's gotten word that Yrene has made it back to the tour safely and hasn't left again. And so he kind of just like spends the day waiting for her, but she doesn't show up. He waits and waits and waits, and by dinner time he realizes that she's not coming. So after he eats dinner, he like takes a hot bath trying to like ease some of the pain that he's in, and then he goes to bed. And the next morning he wakes up and he feels even worse. And Yrene arrives shortly after dawn and is like, how are you? And he's like, I'm in a lot of pain. I took a bath yesterday to try to be better, but it seemed to make it worse. And Yrene is like, you're stupid. Your body was all inflamed. Like, you should have iced yourself. Okay. How is he to know that? Healer Yrene? He is not a healer. Also, how accessible is ice? I think about this often, actually. Like, in times before like freezers, did they just like, I like know that there was like an ice man because I read Mr. Popper's Penguins when I was in 2nd grade with my class, but like, did these girlies have access to ice when it wasn't like winter and snowing? I don't know if they did. Like, how would you get ice? How is he supposed to ice bath Yrene? Like, I just don't know if that's accessible to him. I don't know. I don't know the ice rules here. And maybe there's magic ice people in Throne of Glassland that just make ice. Regardless, Chaol should have iced instead of heated, and he did not heat. And so Yrene flips him over and is like, okay, well, I'm going to deal with this. I actually think I know how to heal you, like, entirely. And so we're going to do that. And she flips him over, looks at his back, and realizes that the black stain on his back has spread. It's actually spread back to a lot of the places they had already forced it back from, that it, like, has grown, like, quite substantially in the couple days since she's worked on it. And she says to him, I'm going to finish it today. And Chaol dared asked, and what if I can't? Face it, endure it. There was no fear in Irene's eyes, no hesitation. That is not my question to answer. Like, if you can't face it and endure it, Chaol, then you let me know. We don't have to do this today, but like you are going to have to face it and endure it if you want to be rid of it. Like, that's the only way you're going to be able to heal. It had never been Irene's question to answer. Chaol watched the sunlight dance on her locket over those mountains and seas, what she might now witness within him, how badly he'd failed, over and over. He's, like, so nervous about Yrene seeing the worst of him, because he knows within the darkness is, like, all of his shame. All of his shame, all the worst parts of Chaol are, like, tucked into this dark place inside of him. But, he thinks to himself, they had walked this far down the road together. She had not turned away from any of it, and neither would he. And Yrene turns to him and is like, okay, I have this theory I need to test. Passes him the leather bit and begins. Chaol's immediately in so much pain, he pretty quickly blacks out from the pain, and he is in this, like, dark place inside of him again. And the first thing he sees is his father, and he sees the promise he made to his father to send Aelin to Wendelin at the end of Crown of Midnight, where he told his father he would come home to Anel if his father helped convince the king to send Aelin to Wendelin. And his father upheld his end of the bargain, but Chaol did not uphold his end. He thinks to himself, oathbreaker, traitor, everything he had done. Aelin had come to rip it apart, starting with his honor. And he gets in this place where he's really blaming Aelin for a lot of these shameful things that he did. He thinks he's, like, blaming Aelin for the fact that Aelin exists in this, like, really morally gray area a lot of times, in which she is willing to do things that would be, in general, considered not great, like murdering people, if it's for the sake of, like, her cause that she's going forward. And so he starts to, like, really blame her in a way that we've seen before for all of his feelings. Like, before Aelin arrived, he was not an oathbreaker or a traitor, and now he is, and he hates her for that. And then he sees Aelin and Rowan, like, the scene shifts, and it's Aelin and Rowan sitting together, and he hates them for, like, the ease at which they fit together, the sense of completion. She had wrecked his life, and then had strolled right to this prince as if going from one room to another. He is like, she, like, ruined everything that I was, everything good that I was, Aelin ruined, and then dumped me on the sidelines. Dumped me like I was yesterday's news. And he's thinking about the ways in which he did wrong by Celaena, and the moment in which Celaena saw Nahimi's body, and how that was really the end for them. Like, that broke something between them so fundamentally that it was irreparable from that moment forward. And when it had all gone to hell, when he had turned his back on everything he knew, when he had lied to the one who mattered most to keep her secrets, she had not been there to help, to fight. She had only returned months later and thrown it in his face, his uselessness, his nothingness. You remind me of how the world ought to be, what the world can be. These are words that he had said, that Aelin had said to him when they were dating. Aelin on multiple occasions in the Crown of Midnight talks about how Chaol is such a good, loyal, honorable man, and that she hopes that, like, that the only way that the world could change is if there are more men like Chaol, because he is a good man. But then, when she returns, like, she's saying a much different story. Lies, the words of a girl who had been grateful to him for offering her freedom, for pushing and pushing until she was roaring at the world again. You will always be my enemy. What he said to her, what Celaena said to him in the moments after Nahimia's death. She had roared those words with 10 years worth of rage, and she had meant it as any child who had lost and suffered at Ardalayne's hands would mean it. And that reminds him of Yrene, and so he's taken back to that memory from Irene's, that memory of Yrene with her mother in the garden as they, like, look at plants together, and it's so, like, sweet and pure. And he thinks to himself, Yrene, the thing he had not seen coming, the person he had not expected to find, here in the darkness, here she was. And yet still he had failed. He hadn't done right by her or by Nesryn. He should have waited, should have respected them both enough to end one and begin with another, but he supposed he had failed in that too. Like, even Yrene is, like, his failure and his shame. And then we are pulled back to Aelin and Rowan, and he looks over and they are like lounging in the shades and the sun, and he looks over and Rowan is holding Aelin's hand, and he like is rubbing his thumb along the marks that the shackles have like permanently etched on her skin. Chaol saw the fire in Aelin's eyes bank. Over and over, Rowan brushed those scars with his thumb, and Aelin's mask slid off. There was fire in that face, and rage, and cunning, but also sorrow. Fear, despair, guilt, shame, pride and hope and love, the weight of a burden she had run from, but now, I love you. I'm sorry. Those words that they exchanged at the end of Crown of Midnight on the dock. She had tried to explain it, had said it as clearly as she could, had given him the truth so he might piece it together when she had left and understand what she meant, those words. I'm sorry. Sorry for the lies, for what she had done to him, his life, for swearing that she would pick him, choose him no matter what. Always. He wanted to hate her for that lie, the false promise which she had discarded in the misty forest of Wendelin. And yet, there with that prince, without the mask, that was the bottomless pit. She had come to Rowan, soul limping. She had come to him as she was, and she had never been with anyone. And she had returned whole. We're watching him like kind of climb out of the darkness now and get to this place where he recognizes that like he was not the right one for Celaena. Like Celaena needed Rowan, or Aelin needed Rowan, right? Like both of those things in order to kind of heal Celaena and become Aelin. She needed Rowan, and because Chaol still loves her in a way, and I think always will love Aelin in a way. Like how could he rob her of that? And also like I think Chaol coming to realize that Celaena messed up in a lot of ways, but like she was always trying her best when it came to Chaol. Shame pressed on him, sickening and oily. He had called her a monster for her power, her actions, and yet he did not blame her. He understood that perhaps she had promised things, but she had changed. The path had changed. And now, again, with Nesryn and Yrene, the path before him changed. Like, he is like, we are at another crossroads. And I know that I love Yrene. I know that, like, this is the right move going forward. But I, like, owe it to Nesryn to also have this closure. To say goodbye to Nesryn, to close that chapter. To not walk down that path. Because I think Chaol has a lot of Chaol's issues. One, stem from anxiety. But as I've talked about before, I feel in my heart of hearts that Chaol is an Enneagram 6. And like loyalty is one of his like core tenets. And I think he always sees a lot of failure in these endings of relationships. And I think in this moment he's like trying to come to the realization that like it doesn't make him bad to end a relationship with Nesryn. Like this is not their path forward. And by like letting go of this, it in the end could be good for both of them. My sister's asking if I think it's Reputation Day. I don't know. Do you guys think it's Reputation Day? You'll already know. Did Taylor Swift's Reputation come out on Tuesday? Or the announcement? Okay, she's in her lover era. Is she wearing black? We have to investigate. If there's weird cuts, it's Taylor's fault. Kayla's looking at Dorian now, and Dorian in this throne room, and we see Sorsha and the king beheading Sorsha. A prince screaming in agony, in rage and despair. I love you. Go. That, if there had been a cleaving, it was that moment when he turned and ran, when he left his friend, his brother in that chamber, when he ran from that fight, from that death. Dorian had forgiven him, did not hold it against him, yet he still had run, still left. Everything he planned, everything he worked to save, all came crumbling down. Dorian stood before him, hands in his pockets, a faint smile on his face. He did not deserve to serve such a man, such a king. BRB, sobbing, like sobbing as I put this together, as I read this section. I think this is so beautiful. If I've said it once, I will say it 1,000 times. My favorite relationship. I know I've been like joking around like whether do I like Chaol and Yrene or Aelin and Lorcan better in this situation, because those are my top 2 favorite romances. My favorite relationship in this book series is Dorian and Chaol. Dorian and Chaol, I love their friendship. I think it is so beautiful. One of the biggest Throne of Glass pet peeves is when people call Throne of Glass a romantasy. Not because I don't love romantasies, because I do. It's not like I think that's a disparaging thing to call it, but it's just like not true. I think a romantasy becomes a romantasy instead of a fantasy that has some romances in it when you can't take away the romance or you can't have the plot really occur without the romances. And I think this book works without the romances. I don't think this book works without the friendship between Dorian and Chaol. I think their friendship is so central to every single book and every single plot arc. And I think Chaol's character makes literally no sense without his friendship to Chaol at his center. Like, it is his centerpiece. It is his most important thing. And I love it so much. And it does make me cry. Okay, we're going to read like a large chunk. There's a lot of me reading in this video because there's so much that is so good, and like a summary just won't do it justice. He had been so afraid of magic and of loss, of everything. And that fear, it had driven him to it anyway. It had hurried him down this path. He had clung so hard, had fought against it, and it had cost him everything. Too late. He had been too late to see clearly. And when the worst had happened, when he saw that collar, when he saw his men swinging from the gates, their broken bodies picked over by crows, it had cracked him through to his foundations. To this hollow pit beneath the mountain he'd been. He'd fallen apart. He'd let himself lose sight of it. He had not healed. Unmoored and raging, he had not wanted to heal. Not really. His body, yes, but even that. Some part of him had whispered it was deserved. And the soul wound, he had been content to let it fester. Failure and liar and oathbreaker, the darkness swarmed, a wind stirring it. He could stay here forever, in the ageless dark. Yes, the darkness whispered. He could remain and rage and hate and curl into nothing but shadow, but Dorian remained before him, still faintly smiling, waiting for him. He'd made one promise he had not broken it yet, to save them. His friend, his kingdom, he still had that. Even here at the bottom of this dark hell, he still had that. And the road he had traveled so far, no, he would not look back. What if we go on only to find more pain and despair? Aelin had smiled at his question, posed on that rooftop in Rifthold, as if she had understood long before he did that he would find this pit and learn the answer for himself. Then it is not the end. This was not the end. This crack in him, this bottom was not the end. He had one promise left. To that he would hold. It is not the end. He smiled at Dorian, whose sapphire eyes shone with joy, with love. I'm coming home, he whispered to his brother, his king. I just love it. I love it so much. I think this is so beautiful. I think Dorian is phenomenal. I love Dorian so much because he talks about how like Dorian had forgiven him, and I don't think for a moment Dorian blamed him. Like, I don't think for a singular moment Dorian blamed Chaol for being locked in that valg collar. And Aelin, he's like, I think Aelin knew that I was going to find this dark pit. And Aelin knew that because in Queen of Shadows, when they're having this conversation, Aelin found that dark pit in air fire. Like, she had gone into the darkness within herself and had unpacked her shame in the way that Chaol is doing so now. Like, this is Chaol's air of fire. And while Aelin's involved a lot of her like training physically and like training her body physically, Chaol's has involved like a lot of like mental work and a lot of that, and of falling in love and allowing himself to be open to love again. I feel like sometimes when I talk about like how often I cry in these books, you like don't see me like fully cry. Not like I got a little teary, a little misty. Like, I was sobbing during this part, like snotty. Anyway, I love Chaol and Dorian so much. And I just feel like, honestly, I do. At this point, like, I feel like I'm not being Chaol's PR person anymore. Because if you still need me to be Chaol's PR person when we are at this far into Tower of Dawn, like, I just know I don't trust you. I don't need you to like Chaol. Chaol doesn't need to be your favorite character. Chaol's not my favorite character. Okay? Chaol's not even my top 5. I think if you hate Chaol, you can't find anything redeeming about Chaol. I don't trust you. I don't trust you. If you read Tower of Dawn and you still hate Chaol, you're not my people. Anyway, we go back into the darkness, and suddenly Yrene is with him in the dark, and she is glowing. And she comes to Chaol and she says, the darkness is yours, to shape it as you will, to give it power or render it harmless. And Chaol's like, was it ever the valgs? Like, was this ever the valgs to begin with? And she says, yes, but it is yours to keep now. This place, this final kernel of it, it would remain with him, a scar, a reminder. Will it grow again? Chaol asks. Only if you let it. Only if you do not fill it with better things. Only if you do not forgive. And Chaol knew Yrene did not just mean others. Yrene continues, but if you are kind to yourself, if you love yourself, Irene's mouth trembled, if you love yourself as much as I love you. And Yrene held out her hand and explains that it's going to hurt like one last time. The darkness is going to want to hold on to him as they leave they leave one last time, but like then it will be over. Then he will be better. Irene's smile was brighter than the glow rippling off her body. A star. She was a fallen star. She extended her hand again, a silent promise of what waited on the other side of the dark. He still had much to do, oaths to keep. And looking at her, at that smile, he had a life to savor, to fight for. And the breaking that had started and ended here, yes, it belonged to him. He was allowed to break so the forging might begin. So that he might begin again, he owed it to his king and to his country. He owed it to himself. Yrene nodded as if to say yes, so Chaol stood. He surveyed the darkness, this piece of him, and he did not balk at it. It was agony and despair and fear. It was joy and laughter and rest. It was life, all of it. And as that darkness lunged for Chaol and Yrene, he did not fear it. He only looked towards the dark and smiled, not broken, but made anew. And when the darkness beheld him, Chaol slid a hand along its cheek and kissed its brow. Wow. I think that's like maybe one of my favorite lines in Tower of Dawn is this moment in which he says that when the darkness lunged for Chaol, he slid a hand along its cheek and kissed its brow. This sense that like Chaol is no longer afraid of this darkness. The darkness has no control over him, but he's also like thankful for what it showed him. Like he is not angry at the darkness either. Like he sees it for what it is. And what it is like a part of him that he learned and grew from. Chaol comes to, he is in his bed with Yrene, and he is healed. Like, he can feel his legs, he can feel his feet, like, they feel as they did before. And the mark is still there, but it doesn't contain that dark power anymore. Like, it is just, like, a reminder. And that night, they're in bed together, and they're just kind of, like, chatting. And Chaol says to Yrene, in the darkness, you said that you loved me. And Yrene is like, yeah, but, like, do not feel obligated. And Chaol is like, is it true? And Yrene is like, yes. And Chaol says to her, then it is a good thing, Yrene Towers, that I love you as well. Her chest tightened. She became too full for her body, for what coursed through her. From the moment you walked into the sitting room that first day, Chaol said, I think I knew even then. I was a stranger. You looked at me without an ounce of pity. You saw me, not the chair or the injury. You saw me, and it was the first time I'd felt seen, felt awake in a long time. And I love this because we're told more than once that the reason Aelin and Rowan work is because Rowan is able to like see all of her and not be afraid. And I think we get this similar message here with Yrene. Like Chaol is like, Yrene, you saw me even in this broken state. You saw all of me. To see all of him, to see his dark places, and to be able to love him anyway. I think for Chaol it is a really big thing. This idea that like even though he has failed, he's been a failure in so many things, that Yrene was able to see him, see his potential, and see his goodness. Yrene is like, the healers are never gonna let me hear the end of this. They have been obsessed with you. Hafiza is gonna be dying. She's gonna love this so much. And Chaol says to Yrene, and beyond that, the choice is yours, Yrene. When you leave, how you leave, if you truly want to leave at all. But if you'll have me, there will always be a place for you at my side on my ship. And Yrene is like, what sort of place? And Chaol says, I mean, like the usual options. You could be a scullery maid, or like a cook, or like a dishwasher. And she poked his ribs and laughed. It was a beautiful sound, rich and deep, but his brown eyes softened as he cupped her face. What place would you like, Yrene? And Yrene says, whatever one gives me the right to yell at you if you push yourself too hard. She drew her hand along his legs, his back. Careful. He'd have to be so careful for a while. A corner of Chaol's mouth kicked up, and he hauled her over him. I think I know. Just the position. If you cut back over to Nesryn and Sartaq, they are arriving back at the Aerie, and like things are crazy. Falcon is still in his spider form because he was pretty gravely injured, and as we know, shapeshifters like need to have energy in order to shapeshift forms. And so he's stuck in his spider form. The rooks are obviously like a spider inside the area. We need to eat him. And so Hanlu is like having to like fend him off. Everyone's covered in this like sticky black Karankui blood. They need healers. Like things are kind of chaotic, and healers are called for. The rooks and the riders are like taken care of. And Sartaq turns to Bort and is like, how the heck did you manage that? Like, how the heck did you come and rescue us? Like, you were forbidden from coming by our Hearth Mother. And Bort says, yeah, by our Hearth Mother. But the thing is, since I'm betrothed to Euron, his Hearth Mother also I'm loyal to. And she said it was fine. She said it was fine if I went to the Karankui territory. And Euron, like, kind of laughs. And he's like, yeah, she said it was fine because Bort finally agreed to set a date for the wedding. And he then winked at Sartaq and he said, too bad I didn't agree to that date. And then Sartaq and Nesryn hug. And they're just, like, glad to be alive. And the next couple days, they sleep together. Not hook up, but like just sleep in the same bed. They're like kind of attached at the hip. Sartaq just like pulls Nesryn into his bedroom at this first day, and then they just like never really separate. Something has changed between them after, you know, Sartaq's confession as he was pinched between those rocks. 2 days later, the Council of the Clans happens, where all the Hearth Mothers and all the captains from every Aerie gather in the hall, and the like space is full with all of these people. And the Hearth Mother explains what happened with the current coup and kind of what they anticipate will be happening next. And Nesryn goes up and speaks and says, "We do not face an army of men in the northern continent, but of demons, and if we do not rise to meet this threat, if we do not rise to meet its people, meet it as one people of all lands, then we will find our doom instead." And she goes on and tells them the whole history of Erwan and Maeve and everything that they know except the word keys. Again, we are not telling everyone about the word keys. By the time Nesryn was done, the hall was astirred as the clans whispered to one another. "I leave this choice to you," Sartaq said, voice unfaltering. "The horrors and the Dagu fells are only the start. I will pass no judgment if you choose to remain, but all who fly with me, we soar under the Kogon's banner. We shall leave you to debate amongst yourselves." And Sartaq pulls Nesryn into the kitchen where they meet Falcon, and he is doing okay. He's recovered. He's still like a little sore, but like doing okay. He's going to be totally fine. And Nesryn turns to him and is like, "If we fly north, do you want to come with us?" And Falcon is like, "Would you want me there? Like any of you? You guys like, remember Sartaq, you like hated shapeshifters like 2 days ago." And Nesryn says, I actually have something to tell you." And Falcon wept. Same, I also cried in this moment. Put his head in his hands and wept when Nesryn told him what she suspected. She did not know much of Lysandra's personal history, but the ages and location matched. Only the description did not. The mother had described a plain, brown-haired girl, not a black-haired, green-eyed beauty. But yes, he would come to war to find her, his niece, his last shred of family in the world, for whom he had never stopped looking. They all come back out into the main room because the council has decided what they're going to do. And a messenger runs up before they can hear the decision to Nesryn with a message in Chaol's handwriting. And it says, like, that he is requesting their presence urgently. And she is, like, shaking. He begs us to return immediately, as fast as the winds can carry us. And she thinks to herself, if Chaol, who had never asked for help, never wanted help, had told them to hurry. She glanced towards the council, still waiting for their decision, but Nesryn only asked the prince, "How soon can we be airborne?" Nesryn is like, "We gotta get back there ASAP." Chaol is not an exaggerator, and if he's like, "I need some help," like, things are probably quite bad. They're not quite bad, honestly. In this moment, Chaol is taking a nap with Yrene in his bed. They're literally just in bed. They literally just spend all day hanging out in bed together. Okay? You're like, "Nesryn, hurry. I guess they like can't do a lot until Nesryn gets back, but it does seem, we could be like maybe looking at books. We could be doing some research. We could be like packing, getting ready to go. No, Chaol's in bed with his new girlfriend." But anyway, they're chatting and they're talking about what might be in those books that Hafiza keeps in her super secret cabinet. And they're talking about that, and then he starts to tell her the story of Celaena. He told her last night of the assassin named Celaena, who had turned out to be a queen named Aelin. The entire history of it laid bare. A long one and a sad one. His voice had grown hoarse when he had talked to Dorian of the collar and the valg prince, of those they had lost, of his own role, the sacrifices he'd made, the promises he'd broken, all of it. And if Yrene had not loved him already, she would have loved him then, learning that truth, seeing the man he was becoming, turning into after it all. And then they talk of the glass castle, and Yrene is like, "Oh, let me explain the theory. I think the valgs are kind of like parasites. You had just like a little bit of valg in you, and it feasted on all that shame and fear inside of you. Hafiza and I pulled a tape board from Hasar when I first came here. They feed off their hosts, much in the same way valg do. Enduring it these weeks was not the same as facing it. So I attacked it as I would any other parasite, swarmed around it, made it come to you, attack you as hard as it could so I could get it away from me, so that you might face it, you might defeat it. So you might go where you feared most to tread, and decide whether, at last, you are ready to fight back." And then Yrene is like, "But now now that we've done that with you, I actually think I can heal anyone who's been infected with a valg, like totally heal them. Because before, if someone had the valg collar, they normally had to be killed. Like there was no way to come back from that, except Dorian, who was able to do it because he's like got like special spooky magic, okay? Dorian's special. Obviously, we all know that Dorian is special. He's a cool guy. And people who had the rings on for too long also like could come back from that. And now she's like, I think I figured out how we can do that." And they're like chatting more about the glass castle, and Chaol's kind of like telling the story of like Athriel's ring and how Athriel's ring works. And Chaol realizes that Mala did not make that ring. No, she didn't. Silba did. So like Silba is like more deeply connected to all the valg stuff than they at first realized. And Yrene is like, "We need to talk to Hafiza like right now." But before they can, Hasar walks in the room. Hasar walks in and is like, "Well, looking at their cleared lack of clothes and disheveled hair and know that what they've been up to. Okay, she's aware. At least you two are comfy. We've had some news from your lands. What is it? The words were ground out. Hasar picked at her nails. Oh, just that Queen Maeve's armada managed to find the host Aelin Galathines has been so sneakily patching together. There was quite the battle. Kael's like, what happened? Hasar is like, it was a spectacle apparently. A Fae armada versus a cobbled together human force. Hasar, please, Yrene murmured. Hasar's like, fine. Maeve was trounced. Though there were some interesting details, then the princess rattled off the facts, the numbers. A third of Maeve's armada bearing whitethorn flags had turned on their own and joined Terrason's fleet. Dorian had fought, held the front lines with Rowan. Then a pack of wyverns had soared in from nowhere to fight for Aelin. Manon Blackbeak. Chaol would be willing to bet his life that somehow either through Aelin or Dorian, that witch had done them a favor and possibly altered the course of this war. The magic, they say, was impressive, Hasar went on. Ice and wind and water. Dorian and Rowan. Even rumor of a shapeshifter, Lysandra. But no darkness, or whatever Maeve fights with. And no flame. Chaol braced his forearms on his knees. Though some reports claim they spotted flame and shadow on shore. Far away. Flickers of both. There and gone. And no one spotted Aelin or the Dark Queen in the fleet. It would have been like Aelin to shift the battle between her and Maeve to the shore, to minimize casualties so she could unleash her full power without hesitation. As I said, Hasar continued, fluffing the skirts of her dress. They were victorious. Aelin was spotted returning to our armada hours later. They've set sail north, apparently. He muttered a prayer of thanks to Mala, and a prayer of thanks to whatever god watched over Dorian too. Any major casualties? To their men, yes, but not to any of the interesting players, Hasar said, and Chaol hated her. But Maeve, there and gone, not a whisper of her left. She frowned at the windows. But the others sail north now. To where? Where can I find my king, my brother? I'd assume Terrason, now that Aelin has her armada. Oh, and another one. Hasar smiled at him, waiting for the question, the plea. What other armada? Chaol forced himself to ask. Hasar shrugged, walking from the room. Turns out, Aelin called in a debt to the silent assassins of the Red Desert. Chaol's eyes burned. And to Wendelin. His hands began shaking. How many ships? He breathed. All of them, Hasar said. Hand on the door. All of Wendelin's armada came, commanded by Crown Prince Galen himself. Aelin. Chaol's blood sparked, and he looked to Yrene. Her eyes were wide and bright with hope. Burning, precious hope. Turns out, Hasar mused, as if it were a passing thought, there are quite a few people who think highly of her. And who believe in what she's selling. Which is what? Yrene whispered. Hasar shrugged. I assume it's what she tried to sell me when she wrote me a message weeks ago, asking for my aid. From one princess to another. Chaol took a shuddering breath. What did Aelin promise you? Hasar smiled to herself. A better world. A better world? We love when Aelin promises a better word. And I personally like to picture Aelin writing this letter to Hasar and being like, I know I set Chaol to be my diplomat, but I don't trust the boy. I know he'll try his hardest. I don't not trust him to try, but he's just not very convincing, not very charismatic. I will send a letter. Because he probably needs my help. Also, I just love that this book is ultimately about hope and small acts of kindness. It is so beautiful. Every time we hit this theme again, I'm like, yes, this is why this book is the best book in Sarah J. Maas's catalog. Not Tower of Dawn specifically, but Throne of Glass in general. Alright, so Chaol and Yrene head to the tour because they really do need to talk to Hafiza, and Chaol is able to go up the stairs. There's stairs and stairs and stairs, and he's following Yrene up the stairs, and he says to her, I just think this is silly. I'm reading it to you. You don't need to know it, but I'm gonna read it to you anyway. No wonder those legs of yours are so pretty. Yrene batted him off, her face heating. Cad. At this hour, most of the acolytes were already heading down to dinner. Several beamed at Chaol as they passed him on the stairs, some younger ones giggling. He gave them all warm, indulgent smiles that sent them into further fits. Hers. He was hers. Yrene wanted to crow at them. This beautiful, brave, selfless man. He was hers. And she was going home with him. Ah, cute. It's cute for 1 second, though, because they get to Hafiza's office and she's not there. She's missing, and no one knows where she is, which is not her typical style. Normally, everyone would kind of be aware of where Hafiza was. Everyone keeps being she's in her workroom, but they checked her workroom. She's definitely not there. And then on their way kind of to look for her, go into Irene's room for a second, and the super secret key to the super secret cabinet is on the ground. That looks like it has been shoved under the door into Irene's room. And Yrene starts to panic because it's clear that Hafiza knew something was coming for her if she were to take this very important key and shove it under Irene's door. And Yrene is very nervous that she's already been attacked in some way, and Chaol's well, we don't know that. Maybe she just sensed that something was coming and wanted to get the key out of her possession. We need to alert the security and see what they know and like move calmly, proceed with calmness forward. And then they just like start running around the tour asking if anyone has seen a Hafiza, but everyone's like, I thought she was in her workroom. And Yrene is like, we should split up and look for her. And Chaol is like, no way. We have to remember that Yrene has never seen a scary movie because scary movies don't exist in the Throne of Glass universe, and so she doesn't know that splitting up is a really bad idea. But Chaol is like, yeah, no, not happening. We're gonna stick together, you dummy. He doesn't call her dummy, but he doesn't internally. And then Yrene is like panicking. Where do we start? She could be in the city. She could be How many exits from the tour are there to the streets, Yrene? Chaol asks. Just the main gate and a small side one for delivery, both heavily guarded. And Chaol's like, okay, let's go ask the guards at both of those gates and see if she's left and is in the city. And they ask the guards, she is not left. She is still in the tour. And Chaol's like, okay, so she has to still be in here somewhere unless there's another another exit that you didn't mention. And Yrene is like, well, there is the super secret tunnels in the library. Okay. Besties, we should have mentioned the super secret tunnels in the library ages ago. Remember when we were trying to investigate how a valg could have gotten into the library? Maybe we should have mentioned there were super secret tunnels in the library to the guards or to Chaol, to like someone. Like this really would have been helpful information to have earlier, but unfortunately Yrene hadn't mentioned it earlier. But they do head to the library. Nusa's there. They actually run to the library and Chaol runs behind Yrene and he's thinking to himself like, I cannot believe I am running. Like a week ago, I could barely walk. And 3 weeks before that, I could not stand. And now I am running. And he's like, even though they're in like a desperate situation, he's like, he can't help but to be like kind of excited by that. Yrene runs up to Nusha and is like, have you seen Hafiza? Also, where are the super secret tunnels in the library? And Nusha is like, oh my gosh, to be concerned. And she's like reaching for that bell, that like alert bell. And Yrene is like, don't ring the bell. I don't want to alert them. I don't want to like set off alarm bells to alert them that like we know Hafiza is missing. So like don't alert that yet. But like yes, trouble is coming. And Nusha gives them directions to the super secret tunnel. So again, she also knew about the tunnels. Again, why didn't anyone mention this when valg got into the library? We should have investigated sooner. Then Chaol like gives her instructions to like summon the guard and send the guard in quietly after them through these tunnels. They're gonna need backup. And Nusha is like, be careful. These tunnels have been left untouched for a very long time. Be on your guard. Even we do not know what lies down there. Like no one goes down in those super secret tunnels. They get to the entrance to the tunnels and Chaol is like, Yrene, you stay here. I'm gonna go down there. And Yrene is like, no, remember how you said we weren't gonna separate? Like we're not gonna separate now. And they go down and there is a trail of candles lighting their path. Which like, if Chaol didn't already think this was a trap, at this point, trap confirmed. Like, this is definitely a trap. There's candles lighting their pathway. And Chaol knows almost instantly also that Hafiza is not the target. Hafiza is the bait for this trap, and Yrene is the target. And he's worried because Yrene is his girly. But they travel through these tunnels. They get to this like room off the tunnels, and it is this treasure room. It is like covered with gold, and like it is massive room with just like towers of treasure everywhere. At the center is this gold throne where Hafiza sits like bound and gagged, and behind her is Duva, the pregnant princess from the palace. And she smiles at them as they walk into this room, and it's very evident that that smile is valg, not human. And she says to them, well, the thing inside the princess said, it certainly took you long enough. And past Duva, we can see that this is like the entrance to a whole underground city. Essentially, there's like a whole necropolis under the city of Antica that travels from like the tour to the palace and is like very vast and was this like fae city beneath the city that they currently live in. Chaol is assessing the situation. He's looking around, trying to figure out if there's a way for him to get everyone out of here safely. Okay, Chaol's trying to assess the situation. Duva sees him doing this and is like, no, you're gonna have to pick me, the healer on high, or Yrene. Like, not all three of us are gonna make it out of here unscathed. But like Duva, despite the fact that she is possessed by the valg, they know now that Yrene thinks she would be capable of healing Duva. So like Duva is not a lost cause. And so ideally, Chaol wants to be able to get everyone out of here safely, especially since Duva is pregnant. And so like, it's kind of like a 2-for-1 deal over with Duva, but obviously he needs to get his girly Yrene out of there, and he knows how important the healer on high is. Like, he is trying to get everyone out of here safely, and Duva is like literally not gonna happen. Valg Duva. And then she uses her spooky Yuki valg voice, and it becomes very clear that that valg that had followed Yrene through the palace was actually Duva. Duva has been the menace causing all these issues this whole entire time. And she tells the story of how she came to be possessed. Essentially, Duke Parrington sent Duva a wedding present, which was like a trove of treasure, like Chaol brought when he arrived. But on top of this trove of treasure was this gorgeous little ring. Duva slipped this little ring on possessed. Okay. They hid the word stone within the ring, and so like you wouldn't have been able to see it from the outside. She slipped it on, was immediately possessed. No one suspected that Duba was possessed because she also became pregnant at the same time, and they're like, maybe it's just pregnancy hormones. Sometimes they be making the girlies be weird. No one expected except their youngest sister, Tuluum. And so that is why Tuluum was shoved. Duva wound up shoving Tuluum over this balcony, and the Valg demon goes on to explain that Duva, trapped inside with this Valg demon, screamed and screamed and screamed. Like, this was just like torturous to her to be killing her own sister. Obviously, it's not a fun day. And Yrene is like, why are you here? What do you want? And the Valg says, you. Duva straightened. The Dark King heard whispers that a healer blessed with Silba's gifts had entered the Tor, and it made him so very wary. And Yrene is like, because I can wipe you all out like the parasites you are. And Kayla's like, Yrene, could you stop? Could you please stop? Do we need to antagonize Duva in this moment? Let's think. No. That's okay. Duva is like, why do you think Maeve was hoarding all of her healers and never allowing them to leave her patrolled borders? She knew we would return. She wanted to be ready to protect herself. Her prized favorites, those Doranel healers, her secret army. And then we come to learn, but some of her fae did escape. They were the ones who came here, and they bred magic into the land. The southern continent itself has like this magic woven into like the continent. And Kayla's like, why? Remember, these girls don't know that Maeve is Valg yet. I mean, I think Duba might. I don't know. Do the Valg know that Maeve is Valg? I'm not sure. I think they do at this point. Anyway, Duva says, to give those Maeve did not consider important a fighting chance should Erwan return. But it seems a little healer slipped the butcher's block and made it all the way to the city with an empire to guard her. Irene's breathing was ragged. He saw the guilt and dread settle in. That in coming here, she had brought this upon them. Two of them, Duva, the Tor, the Cognate. But what Yrene did not realize, Kill instead saw it for her. Saw it with the weight of a continent, a world upon him. Saw what had terrified Erwan enough to dispatch one of his agents. Because Yrene, ripe with power and facing down that preening Valg demon. Hope. It was hope that stood beside him, hidden and protected these years in this city and in the years before it, spirited across the earth by the gods themselves, concealed from the forces poised to destroy her, a kernel of hope. The most dangerous of all weapons against Erwan, against the Valg's ancient darkness. What he had been brought here to retrieve for his homelands, his people. What he had been brought here to protect, more precious than soldiers, than any weapon, their only shot at salvation. Hope. And Yrene then goes, why not kill me? And Kayla's like, could you please stop it? Like, please stop antagonizing Duva. Yrene, do not give her ideas. And Duva, luckily, isn't like, great idea, Yrene. She instead goes, because you are more useful to Erwan alive than dead. And Yrene is like, no, I'm not. I am no one. I am nothing. And Duva says, are you? The princess crooned. 2 years is an unnaturally swift pace to climb so high in the Tor. Is it not, healer? The healer on high knew. She said as much to me when I spirited her out of her room earlier, that I was coming for you, Silba's heir. And Yrene is like, okay, well, if you knew all this, then why didn't you just snatch me earlier? You could have just taken me and pieced out. It would have been easy breezy. You didn't need to do this whole shenanigans. Also, like, why did you kill that healer that looked like me? And Duva's like, well, I killed the healer that looked like you because I was actually just hungry. So that was kind of unrelated. But I also couldn't just snatch you because I didn't want people to start asking questions about why the Valg would just like come in here and snatch this healer. I wanted to make sure that people weren't wondering why Erwan was targeting healers in particular. Certain key players might have started to ponder. So the Tor was to be left alone. Anyway, regardless, you will be coming with me to Morant. You're going to be my little new pet. How exciting. How fun for you. And Kayla steps in front of Yrene, and I picture he has his fists up when he says this. He says, you forgot one thing. And Duva goes, oh? And Kayla goes, you have not won yet. And then he starts doing like, you know when kids like pretend they're going to fight you? And they like start like punching things and like karate chopping? So I think what Kayla did in this moment, personally. Duva goes, I know you were trying to buy yourself time until the guards come, but like, as soon as they come down here, I'm just going to be like, hello, I'm the princess. You know me. Kayla was trying to murder us all. So stop him. Obviously, there's a lot of treasure down here. I'm going to say that you were trying to steal this treasure to take back to your queen for the war. So that actually won't work and won't be super helpful when the guard gets down here. And Irene's like, well, what about me? Like, I'm not going to tell them that Kayla was trying to murder us. And Duva's like, well, you're going to actually do exactly what I say as soon as I slip this wordstone ring on you. And Yrene is like, well, I'm not going to put the ring on. So now what? Duva puts a knife to Hafiza's throat. And is like, okay, what about now? What if I threaten to kill Hafiza? Will you put the ring on? And Hafiza's not having that. She's not going to be a pawn in this girlie's games. And so she chucks herself out of this chair. Remember, she's tied up. But she chucks herself on top of Duba, and they like tumble down these stairs together. They land on the floor with like kind of a not so great sound. This is enough. Duba kind of like springs up, but Hafiza is able to get away from Duba. And Chaol is able to get between Hafiza and Duba and Yrene. And Yrene and Hafiza are like together. And Chaol is like, get out of here. Go, go, go. But Yrene is really reluctant to leave Chaol here with Duba. She knows if she like just leaves Chaol here, like it's probably not gonna end well for Chaol, even though he has fought Valg in the past. Like actually he probably could be fine. But he knows that Yrene knows that Chaol is going to be really reluctant to kill Duba because like one, we know that Duba has the potential to be healed now, but also Duba is pregnant. So it's like double, again, a 2-for-1 deal. And Chaol's probably not gonna want to just like murder randos. As is his moral compass, you know? As we've discussed, Chaol doesn't love killing randos. Duba starts attacking Chaol with like the Valg shadow magic again, while Yrene is just like kind of like standing in the corner watching. But then Chaol is able to like dart away, and he like darts into one of the piles of treasure, and luckily there's like a mirror there, and he holds up the mirror, and then the mirror reflects the Valg shadow magic back onto Duba, and then Duba collapses onto the ground. And Yrene is like very worried that Duba has like been critically injured, and like her healer instincts kick in, and she runs over to Duba, but Duba is actually like mostly fine and smiles up at Yrene and then goes to like shoot a bunch of shadow magic at her, but then Chaol jumps in between Duba and Yrene, and he takes the full brunt of the shadow magic into his body. Agony roared through his spine, down his legs, his arms, into his very fingertips, worse than it had been in the glass castle, worse than it had been in those healing sessions. But all he could see, all he had seen, was Yrene, that power spearing for her heart. Such a pity all that hard work amounted to nothing, Duba trilled, pointed a finger at his spine. Your poor, poor back. And then she sends another spike of power for his spine. And Yrene is like, stop, 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 trying to like get her to stop. And Duba says, I will stop as soon as you put this wordstone ring on. And Chaol is like, no, he snarled. His back bellowed as he tried to get his legs beneath him. Yrene crawled away. A step, another, eyes darting between them. Not again. He would not endure this again. Endure living this one more time. But then he beheld what Yrene grabbed in her right hand, what she had been crawling towards, his sword. Chucks it at Duba. She like low-key does not have a plan at all, but she just like knows that like the situation they were not in was not, there was no good way out. So like, you know, change their circumstances. She chucks the sword at Duba, then gets up and starts running away, and Duba like takes chase after her. And she is like low-key annoyed that Chaol's back is broken. She is like running from Duba, but she's also thinking like, I just spent so freaking long healing this boy's back. 6 weeks of like painstaking work, and it's broken again. I fixed it like literally yesterday. She's a little annoyed at that. But she's also running from Duba as Duba's like shooting shadows at her. And then Yrene rounds one of these pillars, and Duba's just waiting for her on the other side. And Duba like grabs her. And then Chaol comes crawling towards them as Duba is like holding Yrene. And Chaol has crawled, trailing blood, his legs unresponsive, to help her. He stilled, blood sliding from his mouth as Duba stepped onto the walkway, pressing Yrene against her. Shall I make you watch me kill him? Or make him watch me put that ring on you? Duba whispered in Irene's ear. And Yrene is like, don't touch him. Don't touch him. Although she's like not in really a place to be giving instructions. Blood on his gritted teeth. Chaol's arms strained and buckled as he tried to rise. It's too bad I don't have 2 rings, Duba said, mused to Chaol. I'm sure your friends would pay handsomely for you, a grunt, but I suppose your death will be equally as devastating. And then Yrene uses that moment to elbow Duba in the face as she's using her self-defense. She learned self-defense from Aelin and learned some more from Chaol. Girlie is well trained, okay? And she's gonna beat this lady up, as she should. And she's able to like flip Duba and get on top of her, and she has a dagger and she has it pointed directly at her throat, and she's ready to kill her when Chaol says, don't. He's like choking on his own blood as he says this. He is like actively dying. And Yrene thinks to herself, she had to do it now. Drive this blade in. End it, and perhaps she could save him. Stop that lethal internal bleeding. But his spine, a life. She had sworn never to take a life. And with this woman before her, the second life in her womb, the dagger lowered. She'd do it, but Yrene, the word was so full of pain and quiet. It was too late. Her magic could feel it, his death. She had never told him of that terrible gift that healers knew when death sat near. Silva, Lady of Gentle Deaths. The death she would give Duva and her child would not be that sort of death. Chaol's death would not be that sort of death, but the princess looked so young, even as she stirred, and the life in her womb. The life before her. Yrene dropped the knife to the floor. Its clattering echoed over gold and stones and bones. Chaol closed his eyes, and what she could have sworn was relief. And then Hafiza is there, and Hafiza has her hand on Yrene's shoulder, and Sartaq and Nesryn are in the chamber with them, but they're too late. Like, Yrene rushes over to Chaol. Hafiza is able to, like, use some trick to, like, incapacitate Duva. Yrene is able to, like, rush over to Chaol as he's taking his last breaths. "Wake up," she ordered him, her voice breaking. She plunged into her power. But the damage, it was like trying to patch up holes in a sinking ship. Too much, too much. Shouting and steps all around him, his life began to thin, turned to mist around her magic. Death circled, an eagle with an eye upon them. "Fight it," Yrene sobbed, shaking him. "You stubborn bastard, fight it." What was the point of it? The point of any of it? Now, when it mattered, "Please," she whispered. Chaol's chest rose, a high note before the last plunge. She could not endure it, would not endure it. And she's like healing him, but it's like too late. Those injuries are like this mess of black and red, just like tangling around him, choking him out. And she has these like sparks of white as she like patches him up, but it's just like she said, like, patching up a sinking ship. Like, it is too little too late. And she is like really sunk into her magic. She's like in that place where she's kind of like inside Chaol. And she hears a woman's voice that was both familiar and foreign. A voice that was both Hafiza's and another's. Someone who was not human, never had been, speaking through Hafiza herself, their voices blending in the blackness. And all these like white lights are like sparkling around her, and they seem to pause at this otherworldly voice. Yrene brushed herself along those lights, waded through them like a field of white flowers, the lights bobbing and swaying in this quiet place of pain. Not lights, but healers. And the voice that was both Hafiza's and the others said again, "There must be a cost. For what the princess had done to him, there was no returning from it." "I will pay it," Yrene said, into the pain and dark and light. "A daughter of Fenharrow will pay the debt of the son of Ardelane? Yes." She could have sworn a gentle, warm hand brushed her face, and Yrene knew it did not belong to Hafiza or to the other. It did not belong to any healer alive, but to one who had never left her. Even when she had been turned into ash on the wind, the other said, "You offer this of your own free will?" "Yes, with my entire heart." The other said, "I chose well. You shall pay the debt, Yrene Towers, and I hope you shall see it for what it truly is." And then there is this like bright light that starts emanating from Yrene that is like connecting her to Chaol, and behind her, Hafiza puts her hands on Irene's shoulders, and behind Hafiza is just this line of healers with their hands on each other's shoulders. This like community of women, of both alive and not alive, stretching back into a time, like connected by their healing magic. And she is able to heal him entirely, erasing even the scar that he had gotten from Selena on his face. And he wakes up, he comes to him, and he's like, "Hi everyone, how did Sartaq and Nesryn get here?" And Irene's like, "That is actually a great question." And Nesryn's like, "Well, you told us to come urgently, so we did. Again, I am the one you rely on in a group project. Girlie said, come urgently, and she came." And they got here, and the cats led them down to where everyone was waiting down in the basements in the secret tunnels. And there is like a gaggle of cats, of the Bast cats in the corner. And I love that. I love the cats in this book. Also, the healers had followed them down the tunnel too. So there's like healers here, there's guards here. There's like a literal party in the secret tunnels. Party in the secret tunnels, everybody is invited. Duva is unconscious and won't wake up until the healers wake her, but she is not dead. She is okay. And Sartaq looks over at his sister, and he turns to Yrene and he says, "Thank you for sparing her." Like, he had witnessed that moment, and he had witnessed the choice that Yrene had made, and he's grateful for it. He had already lost one sister, and honestly, Hasar is not a nice lady. As you know, I'm not a big Hasar fan, so he was like, "Thank goodness I saw my nice sister." Fair enough. And then Yrene is like holding Chaol, and Chaol like goes to like hug her, and then notices that Yrene is bleeding, and he's like, "You're bleeding," and she's like, "I'm totally fine, like, you were on death's door, so like a little blood never hurt anyone." And Chaol's like, "Excuse me, this girl needs help, she's bleeding." And Hafiza peered over Aretia's shoulder, and Riley asked Yrene, "Are you certain that this pushy man was worth the cost?" Before Yrene could answer, Chaol was like, "Hey, what cost?" And Irene's like, "Well, okay, so you were like pretty much dead, and so I had to make a little deal, a little bargain to save your life." And Chaol's like, okay, what cost? What did you do? She likely made a fool's bargain, that's what, Aretia snapped. Offered to pay the price without being even told what it was, to save your neck. We all heard. Aretia, who's just like another one of the healers, was close to not having a functioning neck herself, but Chaol said, calmly, as he could, pay the price to whom? Not a payment, Hafiza corrected, setting a hand on Aretia's shoulder to quiet her, but a restoration of balance. To the one who likes to see it intact, who spoke through me as we all gathered within you. And Chaol goes, what was the cost? If Yrene had given anything up, he'd find a way to retrieve it. He didn't care what he'd have to pay. To keep your life tethered in this world, we had to bind it to another, to hers. 2 lives, Hafiza clarified, now sharing one thread. But even with that, she gestured to his legs, the foot he slid up to the brace on the floor. The demon broke many, many parts of you. Too many. In order to save most of you, there was a cost. Yrene went still. Well, what do you mean? Hafiza looked again between them. There remains some damage to the spine, impacting the lower portions of the legs that even we could not repair. Hafiza went on. With a life bond between you and Yrene's power flowing into you, it will act as a brace, stabilizing your legs whenever Yrene's magic is at its fullest. He steeled himself for the butt. Hafiza smiled grimly. But when Yrene's power flags, when she is drained or tired, your injury will regain control, and your ability to walk will be again impaired. It will require you to use a cane, at the very least on hard days, and perhaps many days, the chair, but the injury to your spine will remain. And Yrene is like, well, can't I just heal him again? Like, I did it once, can't I do it again? And Hafiza is like, no, like, this is part of the cost. And Chaol turns to Yrene and says, it is no burden. Yrene, to be given this, it is no burden at all. Using the chair is not a punishment. It is not a prison, he said. It never was. And I am as much of a man in that chair or with that cane as I am standing on my feet. I wanted to heal you, Yrene breathed. You did, he said, smiling. Yrene, in every way that truly matters, you did. There's another piece to this life bond, to this bargain, Hafiza added gently. They turned to her. When it is time, whether death is kind or cruel, it will claim you both. This is something that Sarah J. Maas loves to do. She does it with some other characters at a point, and that one makes me want to scream and rip my hair out. But this one I kind of like. I think this one's kind of cute. Also necessary. Like, it wasn't just something they did as a fun little idea. They were like, you know, it'd be fun if we were life bond tied to each other. Like, they had to. Together, Chaol said quietly, and interlaced their hands. Her strength would be his strength, and when Yrene went, he would go. But if he went before her, dread curled in his gut. The true price of all this, Hafiza said, reading the panic. Not fear for your own life, but what losing your life will do to the other. I suggest you do not go to war, Aretia grumbled. But Yrene shook her head, shoulder straightening as she declared, we shall go to war. Pointing at Duva, she looked at Sartaq, as if she had not just offered up her very life to save his. This is what Erewhon will do to all of you if we do not go. And Sartaq is like, yeah, I know, trust me, I know, okay? We were dealing with her own little mess down south. And then Nesryn and Chaol have an eyeball combo, and we know that things must be going wellish between the two of them because they're able to have an eyeball combo. And Chaol has tried to have an eyeball combo with her, and things don't work. When you're not seeing each other fully, you're not able to have eyeball combos. Eyeball combos only happen when you're in a good place with each other, you know? It's the laws of Throne of Glass. So they have an eyeball combo, and Nesryn says to Chaol, she smiles softly over at Yrene, and he looks at Nesryn and says, she had never appeared so settled, so quietly happy. Chaol swallowed. I'm sorry, he said silently. Nesryn shook her head as Sartaq scooped up his sister into his arms with a grunt, the prince balancing his weight on his good leg. I think I did just fine. So they have now come to a place where they're we both of us have moved on, okay? I have a prince. You have the coolest healer in all the land. I think we both actually leveled up. And Chaol smiles. Then I'm happy for you. Again, silently. Eyeball combo. And then he gives Nesryn a hug and says in her ear out loud, thank you. And Nesryn says, thank you for bringing me to this place. Also, we have some Karazé updates. You're never going to believe what we found out down south. It's wild. Then they bring Duva back to the palace to meet with the Kagan. They want to show him the threat. They want to be look, this is what the Valg have done to your own family and what we'll do to your entire continent if you were not careful. And as they're headed to the palace, Yrene comments on the fact that she can feel the bond between her and Chaol. It is this like tenuous silky thread that like ties them together. Thinking about how they're gonna have to learn what his new limits look like and how his life is gonna change when like her power is drained. And Yrene is like very stressed in general about this new bond, this new thing between them is going to change their relationship. But Chaol is not anxious about it at all. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to take that in. Take that in. Our boy, our anxious, sweet baby Chaol, is not anxious about this at all. This like life-changing, life-altering thing in which he will never know what his body is going to be capable of doing in a day. This like complete lack of control over his own life. The fact that his body is going to be tied to another person, something that he relies on as a commander, as a captain. He's not going to have control over it anymore. He's not anxious about it because it's Yrene. They get Duva to the palace. Sartaq carried her. Sartaq lays her on a couch, doesn't let anyone get close to her, and explains that Duva has been possessed by the valg. And Argun is like, no, she hasn't. That's crazy. What are you even saying? And Sartaq explains how it happened. And Cashin is like, actually, that kind of makes sense. She's been kind of weird over the past few months. That means she's the one who killed Toluan, isn't it? And Chaol is like, yes, she confessed to that, but like you have to recognize and realize that like it was the demon inside of her that did it. Like Duva had nothing to do with it. Duva fought against it. And Cashin is like, can you fix her? And Yrene says, I will try. And Chaol is like, Kagan, we need assistance up north. Like now you can see what the valg have done. Like the valg have already reached your shores. And Nesryn cuts in, and like the Karan Kui down in the south are stirring, and they're connected to the valg as well. Like this fight is not just a fight up north. Like this truly is a fight that has already affected your people and will continue to do so. And the Kagan refuses to like offer any aid at this moment. He just says to Yrene, heal her. And then Yrene takes the ring off of Duva, and she can immediately sense that the valg presence within inside Duva is so much stronger than it was with Chaol. It is not this like little scrap. It is like a full valg. And Duva starts like screaming, and the Kagan is like, what are you doing? It seems like you're hurting her. And Hasar is like, let her work. Yrene starts to glow with white light as she like enters into Duva to like do her healing work. And she slips into the darkness inside of Duva and sees the valg demon. Indeed, it is a parasite, and she attacks it in a similar way that she did with Chaol. Meanwhile, she can feel Chaol, who is just like standing behind her, like rubbing her back as she's like doing her healing work. And Yrene says to the valg, I am not afraid of you, and you have nowhere to run. She says, I'm gonna get you. I'm gonna get you. And your little dog too. I don't think the valg have dogs. They're just like, I guess they have the current Kui. They have little spiders. That's kind of like dogs, sort of. And slowly but surely she's able to push the valg out of Duva. And eventually Duva like rolls over and like throws up, pukes out like a big black shadow that turns to dust as soon as the sunlight touches it. It is like the valg demon. And Yrene then checks on the baby, and the baby seems totally fine. Like physically, Duva is okay. And Duva immediately goes over and she's hugging her family, and she's just like sobbing. And we see like the Empress come out. I think this is the first time in the book we've actually seen the Empress. She comes out to like hug her daughter as well. And the whole family is just together. And Hasar looks over and sees Yrene, and she mouths the words, thank you. Yrene notices that Chaol at some point had gone back in his chair. He's sitting back in his wheelchair because she has used so much of her power on Duva that he does not have the ability to stand anymore. Chaol wheeled over to her, scanning her features, but his own face held no grief, no frustration, only awe. Awe and such adoration it snatched her breath away. Yrene settled into his lap, and he looped his arms around her as she kissed his cheeks. I love this moment because I do think that one of the things that really defines love within the story is this ability for characters to like see the other. And I think this is such an important moment for Chaol because for so much of his relationship with Aelin, he's been so terrified of her power. And like granted, Aelin's power and Yrene's power present in like much different ways. Like Yrene's power seems much less scary, I think, in general. But for Chaol to look at just like this vast quantity of magic that Yrene possesses, because Yrene is incredibly powerful, and to be able to look at that with like awe instead of like the fear and disgust she showed in the face of Aelin's magic, I think there is this, again, this beautiful moment of Chaol being able to see all of Yrene, all that she is, all of the power within her, and to look at her and be like, you are incredible, you are the coolest, I'm not afraid of you. The Kagan turns to Yrene and says, anything you want is yours. And Yrene says, I have a favor to ask you, but we will not find out that favor. A few minutes later, when the whole crew ends up in Chaol and Nesryn's suite. And Chaol explains what it had felt like for Yrene's power to be used up and how he could feel it in his own body, these like waves of the power going out of her, and how he had like called for a chair, and by the time Yrene had like finished with the healing, like he truly needed it. There was like no way he would have been able to like stand or walk. Like although he could still feel his legs, there was like absolutely no strength left in them. And he thinks to himself, it did not frustrate him, did not embarrass him. If this was to be his body's natural state for the rest of his life, it was not a punishment, not at all. But this does change Chaol's life pretty substantially, and he is thinking through like what it will look like for him to be in a battle in this state, especially because he imagines like Yrene will be on the sidelines of battles going forward, acting as a healer, and like he wants her to be able to fulfill her calling in the same way that he wants to be able to fulfill his, and he knows that he will be fighting alongside of his men, whether it is on horseback or whether it's on foot. And then they sit down and they're like ready to exchange information. Nesryn starts and she says, so Maeve is a valg queen. And then she explains everything that happened with like the current queen over the past few weeks. And then Yrene explains why Maeve's healers fled and came here. And she explains the connection between Maeve's healers, the Fae, and the Southern Continent. Then Nesryn is like, oh, that actually explains why Maeve always has an owl with her. Aelin talked about how Maeve has like a pet owl that is always with her. It is not a regular owl. This is a Fae in owl form, probably one of her healers that she keeps close by as like a bodyguard. She like lets everyone believe it's some sort of pet, but like it is like a bodyguard. And there's like some more discussion about what they learned, and then Sartaq says, I'm only able to bring half of the Rook riders with me, but that's 1,000 Rooks and riders. If we can join Aelin's host along with the 13 and any other Iron Teeth man in Blackbeak can sway to our side, we will have an aerial legion to combat Morants. Nesryn finished, eyes bright with hope. Yes, but something like dread too, as if perhaps she realized what combating would ensue, the lives at stake. Yet she turned to Yrene, and if you can heal those infected by the valg, they have a chance. It's like there's like hope in that moment. But before they can kind of finish this conversation, Hasar walks in and she's like, seems like I'm missing a war council. What are you guys chatting about? And Sartaq is like, who said that we were discussing war? Like, we're not discussing war, like, literally at all. And Hasar is like, you mean to tell me that all the Rooks that are shitting up on the roof are just here for, like, kicks and giggles for, like, a fun time? Sartaq? Like, obviously you guys are going to war. And then she looks to Yrene and she says, I will come with you. And Yrene is like, alone? Not alone. The mocking amusement was gone from her face. You saved Duva's life. In ours. If she had grown more bold, a glance to Sartaq, who watched with mild surprise. Duva is the best of us. The best of me. Hasar's throat bobbed. So I will go with you, with whatever ships I can bring, so that my sister will never again look over her shoulder in fear. So you will have to suffer my company for a while yet, Lord Westfall, Hasar said. But that edged smile was not as sharp, because for my sisters, both living and dead, I will march with my sword to the gates of Moranth, and make that demon bastard pay. She met Yrene's stare. And for you, Yrene Towers, for what you did to save Duva, I will help you save your land. And then they hug, which is sweet, I guess. I don't know. Still not a fan. Although in this moment I was doing the notes and I was like, oh my gosh, is Hasar Nesta? Is Hasar the Nesta of the story? And that did rattle me because I like really, really dislike Hasar. But like Nesta is my girl. Like Nesta is my girl in ACHHH. Like from book 1, Nesta was my girl. Okay? If I do ACHHH, which like... Should I do ACHHH? If I do ACHHH at some point, we'll have to talk about it, because like if you thought I rode hard for Chaol in these books, you haven't seen anything. I like would die for Nesta Archeron. I love that girl so much. And in this moment I was like, oh my gosh, is Hasar just like the Nesta of her own story? I don't think so, because Nesta at her core is a girl's girl, and Hasar is at her core not a girl's girl. And I do think that is like the major difference. Like they're both mean, nasty girlies who care deeply about their sisters, but I think at her core, Nesta is a girl's girl, and Hasar doesn't really seem like it. After this little meeting, Nesryn decides like she needs some space, she needs some air. She's gonna head up actually to like the Aerie to, I don't know, just like it's quiet up there. She's gonna head up there. But before she can get out to the Aerie, a messenger intercepts her and passes her a message, and it's from her uncles, and it's 2 weeks old. Why did we not forward this mail to like the Rookin? Why did we not forward it down south to there? Or why didn't we give it to Chaol? You know, like it seems like this message really shouldn't have just been sitting around for 3 weeks, but whatever it was, it's a message from her uncle. She rips it open and then immediately runs up the stairs to grab a rook from the Aerie. And she flies to her uncle's house, and her whole family is there. Her uncle was able to get them on a boat, and her father and her sister's children are all there, like, waiting for her, and she's, like, overjoyed. She's, like, weeping. Sartaq finds her there a few hours later, probably because she brought a rook and just had it, like, sitting outside in downtown Antigua. It was, like, probably pretty easy to track her down. And Sartaq says as he arrives, "I heard Captain Faliq's family had arrived at last safely." Sartaq said, by way of greeting, "I thought I'd come to welcome you myself." All the kids are just, like, running around so excited about Nesryn's stories and to, like, see the rooks outside, and they're just, like, jumping around having a great time. And they go outside to go see Kadara, and they're, like, messing around with Kadara, and Sartaq and Nesryn use that moment to, like, take a small walk. They don't go far, but they just go far enough where Sartaq can talk to Nesryn in private. And Sartaq says to Nesryn, "I talked to my father, told him I will be leading the rooks into war in the northern continent, whether he approves or not." Sartaq took a breath. He asked me why. "I hope you told him that the fate of the world might depend on it," Nesryn says. Sartaq chuckled. "I did, but I also told him that the woman I love now plans to head into war, and I intend to follow her." She didn't let the words sink in, didn't let herself believe any of it until he finished. "He told me that you are common born, that a would-be heir of the Kagan needs to wed a princess or a lady or someone with lands and alliances to offer. I told him if that's what it took to be the chosen heir, I didn't want it, and I walked out." Nesryn sucked in a breath. "Are you insane?" Sartaq smiled faintly. "I certainly hope not. For the sake of this empire," he tugged her closer until their bodies were nearly touching, "because my father appointed me heir before I could walk out of the room." Nesryn goes to bow, and Sartaq is like, no. Not from you. Never from you. Like, that's not our relationship. "We fly to war. Much is uncertain ahead, save for this." He brushed his mouth against hers. "Save for what I feel for you. No demon army, no dark queen or king shall change that." Nesryn shook, letting the words sink in. Sartaq, you are heir." He pulled back to study her again. "We will go to war, Nesryn Faliq. And when we shatter Erewhon and his armies, when the darkness is at last banished from this world, then you and I will fly back here, together." He kissed her again, a bare caress of his mouth. "And so we shall remain for the rest of our days." She heard the offer, the promise, the world he laid at her feet. She trembled at it, what he so freely gave, not the empire and the crown, but the life, his heart. They kiss. It's, like, very, very sweet. And Nesryn says he tasted like home. She says to him, "To war, Sartaq," she breathed, memorizing every line of his face. "And then we will see what comes after." Sartaq gave her a knowing, cocky grin, as if he'd fully decided what would come after, and nothing she could say could convince him otherwise. From that courtyard just a wall away, her sister shouted loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear, "I told you, father!" We love an eavesdropping sister. A few days later, Yrene and Chaol are on a boat. She had said her goodbyes to Cashin, and he kind of expressed some regret over expressing his feelings back on the steps and making her feel uncomfortable in those moments. He was really sad that he had lost her as a friend over those months, in hopes that they can have some sort of friendship if they ever were to encounter each other again. He says, "Who knows, maybe I'll see you up north sometime." And she just, like, watches as the city she loved and the place she called home for the last 2 years disappears over the horizon, and the Tor seems to wave farewell, like, towering over the horizon for, like, longer than it should have been possible. But it's time for her to, like, return home. Time for her to go home to Fenharrow. And then we switch to Chaol's POV, and we learn that it took him a few days to recover from Duba's healing as far as Irene's power to recuperate. Like, that first day, he was, like, fully in a wheelchair, and then he was able to use a cane, and, like, slowly, he was able to regain his strength back. He is really coming to recognize the fact that he's never really going to know when he is going to have access to, like, the full strength of his legs and when he will not, because, like, we don't know when Yrene is going to need to use her powers, and he would never want to limit her. Like, he knows that she is just, like, truly a force, and she is incredible, and, like, he would never want to put a damper on that in any way. And he comes up behind Yrene, who's just, like, looking over the horizon, the open ocean around them. He says to her, "Watching the horizon won't get us there any faster," he murmured into his neck. And she says, "Neither will teasing your wife about it." That's right, girlies. They got married. Have they been dating for approximately 10.5 minutes? Yeah. They have. But whatever. I'm on board with it, okay? I love it so much. Chaol smiled against her skin. "How else am I to amuse myself during the long hours than by teasing you, Lady Westfall?" Yrene snorted, as she always did at the title, but Chaol had never heard anything finer, other than the vows they had spoken at Silba's temple at the Tor 2.5 weeks ago. "For someone who hates being called Lord Westfall," Yrene mused, "you certainly seem to enjoy using the title for me." "You're suited to it," he said, kissing her neck again. he had brought the couch, this like the gold couch that had been in their room that they had done so many of their healing sessions on, that they had like made out for on the first time. Chaol's like, I needed to keep that as a souvenir. It was like ripped up from the time that the valg had like sacked their room, but he kept it anyway. Also, Hasar had given him that mean horse that they rode in the desert that was called Butterfly. Now he has Butterfly. That was Hasar's wedding present to him. Yrene, he looks over at Yrene's locket and wonders if he can get the initials on it changed, because now she's Yrene Westfall, which does make me a little sad, because I think there is something beautiful about her connection to the tour through her last name Towers, and I think maybe we like could have hyphenated. Like, I understand that like Chaol needs to keep the Westfall name because like he is like a lord and like the Westfall family owns it now. Like, that totally makes sense to me. But like, could Yrene have been Towers Westfall, Westfall Towers? Like, I feel like we could have hyphenated her last name. Whatever. Yrene smiled down at the locket, the silver near blinding in the midday sun. I suppose I don't need my note any longer. Chaol's like, why? Because I'm not alone, she said, running her fingers over the metal, and because I found my courage. She scanned the text she'd read 1,000 times. I wonder if she'll return for this war, whoever she was. She spoke of the Empire like. Yrene shook her head, more to herself, folded it and shut it again. Perhaps she will come home to fight, from wherever she sailed off to. And she pulls the scrap of paper out of the locket and passes it to Chaol. And Chaol looks at it and immediately recognizes it. He looks over it at the handwriting that he knew as well as his own. Yrene went still at the tears he could not stop from sliding down his face. What's wrong? She would have been 16, nearly 17 then. And if she had been in Anesh, it would have been on her way to the Red Desert, to train with the silent assassins, the bruises Yrene had described, the beating Arab and Hamel had given her as punishment for freeing Rolf's slaves, and wrecking Skull's Bay. Chaol, for wherever you need to go, and then some, the world needs more healers. There, in her handwriting. A gift. A gift from a queen who had seen another woman in hell and thought to reach back a hand, with no thought of it ever being returned. A moment of kindness, a tug on a thread, and even Aelin could not have known that in saving a barmaid from those mercenaries, in teaching her to defend herself, in giving her that gold in this note, even Aelin could not have known or dreamed or guessed how that moment of kindness would have been answered. Not just by a healer blessed by Silber herself, capable of wiping the valg away, but by 300 healers who had come with her. And then we are explained what Yrene's favor that she asked of the Kagan was. Save my people. That's what all she had asked, all she had begged, to save my people. So Kagan had answered with 1,000 ships from Hasar's armada, and his own filled with Kashan's foot soldiers and the Dargan cavalry, the horse lords. Chaol folded up the paper and he says, keep it a while longer. I think there is someone who will want to see that. Every step of it had led here. From that keep in the snow-blasted mountains where a man with a face as hard as the rock around them had thrown him into the cold, to that salt mine in Endover where an assassin with eyes like wildfire had smirked at him, unbroken despite a year in hell. An assassin who had found his wife, or they had found each other. Two gods-blessed women wandering in the shadowed ruins of the world, who now held the fate of it between them. Every step, every curve into darkness, every moment of despair and rage and pain had led him precisely to where he needed to be, where he wanted to be. A moment of kindness from a young woman who had ended lives to a young woman who saved them. That shriveled scrap of darkness within him shrank further, shrank and fractured into nothing but dust that was swept away by the sea wind, past 1,000 ships sailing proudly and unyieldingly behind him, past the healers scattered amongst the soldiers and horses, Hafiza leading them, who had all come when Yrene had asked them to help her save her people, past the rooks soaring through the clouds, scanning for any threats ahead. Yrene was watching him warily. He kissed her once. Twice. He did not regret. He did not look back. Not with Yrene in his arms at his side. Not with the note that she carried. That bit of proof. That bit of proof that he was exactly where he was meant to be. That he had always been headed there. Here. For me, this is the thesis of the Throne of Glass series. It is that this, even in the face of immeasurable, intense, overwhelming darkness, in the face of despair and pain and shame, all it takes is one single moment of light, one tiny moment of kindness to change everything, to change the course of everything that will come. The moments of light don't have to be quite as grand and spectacular as the moments of darkness have been in order to be impactful. Yrene doesn't know why Chaol and I are crying. Yrene is just like, okay, you weirdo. And she says to him, will I ever hear an explanation for this dramatic reaction? Yrene said at last, clicking her tongue. Or are you just going to kiss me for the rest of the day? Chaol rumbled a laugh. It's a long story. He flung an arm around her waist and stared out towards the horizon with her. And you might want to sit down first. Those are my favorite kind, she said, winking. Chaol laughed again, feeling the sound in every part of him, letting it ring clear and bright as a bell, a final, joyous pealing before the storm of war swept in. This story of yours had better be worth it, she said with a wry grin. Chaol smiled back at his wife, at the light he'd unknowingly walked towards his entire life, even when he had not been able to see it. It is, he said quietly to Yrene. It is. We're almost done. We've got one baby tiny chapter left. Ugh, I don't want to do it. What if we pretended this chapter didn't exist? Everyone's having such a nice time. I'm like so glad that Chaol is having such a lovely time with his wife. XOXO, wish we could hang out there on the boat. Instead, we do have to have an Aelin check-in chapter. And it is a bad time, okay? It is the worst time, in fact, I would say. I want us all to like brace ourselves to carry the light that we just got. We just received a bunch of light in this book. Moments of light, moments of hope. We're going to carry that hope. We're going to carry it into this next moment. Because remember, the thesis statement of Tower of Dawn was this. What if we go on to only more pain and despair? What if we go on only to find a horrible end waiting for us? Then it is not the end, okay? So this might be the end of our book, but this is not the end of our story. We get this last chapter called Fireheart. I'm about to cut to a piece of fan art that is like absolutely stunning and gorgeous, but does hurt my feelings. So brace yourself, prepare yourself. Okay, great. And I'm just going to read you a little bit of this. They had entombed her in darkness and iron, a coffin built by an ancient queen to trap the sun inside. Draped with iron, encased in it, she slept, dreamed, a princess of nothing, nameless. The princess sang to the darkness, to the flame, and they sang back. As we know at this point, at the end of Empire of Storms, Aelin was captured by Maeve and has been put in this glass coffin would have been lovely. This iron coffin, like, snuffs out her magic in this way that is, like, fairly unbearable. We kind of know that if she, like, we've been told as we go that, like, if Aelin doesn't let out bits of her magic as she goes, it, like, builds up in this way that is, you know, pretty uncomfortable for her, and she's just trapped in this iron as the magic inside of her builds up. And she's just being, like, tortured. Gorgeous. The ancient queen's mouth parted in a smile. Teeth as white as bone. You're awake. Good. Lovely and cold. It was a voice that could devour the stars. From somewhere, from the blinding light, rough and scarf-like hands reached into the coffin. The princess did not want to slide back into this body. She struggled against it, clawing for the flame and the darkness that now ebbed away from her like a morning tide. But the huntsman yanked her closer to that cruel, beautiful face, watching with a spider's smile, because she is a spider. Maeve is a Karankui spider inside a Fae woman's body. And he held her still as that ancient queen purred. Let's begin. Okay, so Aelin is actively being tortured by Maeve. And that's where we will pick up next. Because next up we start this little chonker. We're doing Kingdom of Ash. I will warn you guys. Just a warning, word of warning. For Kingdom of Ash, it will be a few weeks before we start Kingdom of Ash. We won't be starting it right away. Those of you who pay attention will know that I also am an author. I have a book out and I have another book coming out next year, and I have a big round of edits due at the end of September, and that is my priority, is to finish up that round of edits before we really delve deep into this. So it'll be probably a few weeks. I'm still imagining I should have the first one out sometime towards the end of September, but give me a few weeks. Give me some time. Please be patient with me as I finish up some other projects, because these are fairly time intensive to put together. I love them. I love them so much. We'll continue. Obviously, we'll finish my girly Kingdom of Ash. We have to pick up Miss Aelin where we left her. That is all. Thank you to Tower of Dawn. I love this. I hope you loved it too. I hope if you were like dreading Tower of Dawn, that going through it together made you dread it a little less. That my conversations around Tower of Dawn made you appreciate Chaol in this story for what it is, which I think is a beautiful story about shame and redemption and forgiveness and hope. We'll see you in the next video, which will probably be something easy breezy, but then I will see you in Kingdom of Ash. Will be easy breezy. I'm gonna sob so much in this book. I'm thinking I'm gonna cry 30 times. 30 separate cries in this book. What do you think? Do you think I'm gonna cry more or less than that? leave it in the comments below. Okay. I will see you then.